Hey, this is Andrew Unterberger, writer of the If Not, Pick Will Convey His 2 second-rounders column for the only Sixers podcast that writes to Ricky Sanchez. I'm here to talk about why the Sixers should wait on any deal that trades Ben Simmons to Houston for James Harden. Now, for one reason or another, I almost always end up against blockbuster trade ideas for the 76ers, whether it was including Markelle Fultz in a potential trade for Kawhi Leonard 3 summers ago or dealing all our remaining assets for Chris Paul this past offseason. Find a reason to talk myself into holding on to what we've already got, rather than going after the big target everybody else seems so focused on. It's probably not that surprising that I'd rather hold on to Ben Simmons than to trade him for James Harden. It's the usual list of reasons why. I'm in too deep emotionally with Simmons after 3 seasons. I want to see Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers get a full chance to solve this roster without taking major shortcuts. And I'm worried about the team not being as fun to root for with Harden reinventing it in his image. You could say it's a loser mentality to value these things over acquiring a superstar, but frankly, you wouldn't be that wrong. You know, what can I say? Losing may or may not build character, but it definitely builds attachment. Now, having said all that, I still think it's probably a good idea for Morey to trade Simmons for Harden, but I think you should wait to do it. For as much as I love Simmons, our other young guys, even the future draft picks we haven't used on anyone yet, I recognize why Harden could be worth dealing all of them for. And that's mostly because the duo of Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons simply not proven to be championship caliber yet on its own. Now, maybe they both take the leap this year, but Raptors fans said that about those, DeMar DeRozan, Kyle Lowry teams pretty much every year where they eventually ended up losing to LeBron. And, at a certain point, your guys are what they are. And if you want to make a huge step forward as a franchise, you have to go out and get Kawhi Leonard. And Harden is that kind of player. He's an automatic playoff berth, perennial top 5 MVP candidate. He's a guy that makes a kind of intuitive sense alongside Joel Embiid that Ben Simmons probably never will. He's a player that you do unbelievably painful things to acquire. Now, does that mean you trade anything and everything not named Joel Embiid just to get him? Well, maybe, but not definitely. I mean, there's obvious risk to dealing an Anthony Davis type kitchen sink package for a player on the wrong side of 30, one who commandeers the entirety of an offense and has a history of both clashing with teammates and coming up short in the playoffs. Now, you might counter that by saying, well, the Sixers offense could use some commandeering, and not to mention that our locker room wasn't exactly the set of Parks and Rec last year. And even if Harden has only made the conference finals as a Rocket, it's still further than any of our returning guys have gotten. But there's still reasons beyond mere sentimentality to be hesitant about just giving Houston whatever they want for him. That's why I say if we're going to make a play for James Harden, let's at least try to do it on our own terms. To me, that means waiting. After last year's miserable playoff exit, time might not exactly be on this team's side, but it is still mostly on Daryl Morey's. Our new GM's already made his big splash since coming over and trading Al Horford and Josh Richardson for Danny Green and Seth Curry, creating a more logical team than any of us expected out of this lumpy roster batter. Now we can credibly argue that he'd actually rather see what he has with his new squad before upending it in any James Harden deal. It's the kind of narrative leverage that can make him seem not so desperate for the former MVP to find his tenure in Houston, maybe actually help him not get taken advantage of in that deal's terms. Of course, it's not to say he's going to go in and immediately start dictating terms of engagement to his old club either. I mean, Houston does still have the best player, one with at least 2 years left on his contract, and that's still the most important leverage that you can have in a deal like this. No one's going to be fleecing Houston. As much as we might want to convince them to take a package based around Tobias Harris instead of Ben Simmons, it's not going to happen. But we do still have Simmons, and that's enough to buy us some time. I mean, none of the other teams that Harden's reportedly okayed as a potential destination have a prospect quite like him. And Chris Middleton's, he doesn't have enough upside left. Karis LeVert's too old, injury prone. Tyler Hero's too young and unproven. I mean, Simmons is the only one who can come in and immediately anchor a rebuild. This guy's already at all-star level, and he still has the potential to get a few levels higher than that. I mean, Houston has the best player, but we have the best prospect, and that makes us worth waiting for. What exactly is there to wait for? Well, I mean, shout out to NBA writer Brian Toporek and a couple other smart NBA folks who suggested that Morey would do a Simmons for Harden deal if one was on the table, but the Rockets have been holding out for both Simmons and an embarrassment of future assets, like the bounty of picks that the Pelicans acquire from Milwaukee just for Drew Holiday. Morey's thus far politely declined. In that case, it would now just basically be a blinking contest between Morey and his old club to see who will compromise more on their side, and that could last well into 2021. Frankly, both teams should hold out. I mean, the Rockets only get to trade James Harden once, and they know he's not going to depreciate any over the course of the season. I mean, no matter how much of a pain it becomes for Houston themselves to handle, countless opposing GMs are still going to move heaven and earth to get him regardless. The Sixers know that until another credible buyer enters the bidding, there's no real risk in playing hardball with Houston. Try to get their price down from an outright gouging to a moderately painful noogie. Aside from that, nothing major in this equation is going to change before the March trade deadline. So then it just becomes a question of what direction the regular season tips the balances towards. Will the Rockets be able to entice either another attractive suitor for Harden or maybe even get Harden himself to reconsider his future there? Or will the Sixers overachieve in the regular season and gel around an improved Embiid and Simmons with shooting around them for once and suddenly not have such a glaring need for a superstar guard to come and save them? Personally, I would bet that Morey, who's stated that he believes the Sixers are being undervalued as a regular season team, is at least hoping for the latter. I mean, the Sixers, who now have the most shooting that they've had around Embiid and Simmons since they won 16 games to end the 2018 season. Since they get out to a hot start, they can make the case that we're okay sticking with what we have and just kind of letting the good vibes roll. At that point, maybe we could convince Houston to accept the deal that gets them Simmons, but not every other positive asset in our arsenal. Now, is it really that important to haggle over future draft picks and mid-level prospects when it comes to securing a generational offensive talent like James Harden? Well, maybe not, but remember that Harden alone doesn't guarantee you a title or even necessarily a shot at it. The teams that throw caution to the wind in deals for players like that, they usually end up regretting it, unless they already have LeBron, in which case, whatever. But the Sixers would still have some serious filling in to do around Embiid and Harden, and they'd have to do it quickly given Embiid's injury history and Harden's advancing years. You trade everything just to pair those two, you might end up like the Carmelo and Amari Knicks of the last decade, without enough to get the rest of the roster up to the championship level. Is that prospect scary enough to risk losing a chance at a top 5 player? Maybe the best and possibly the last such opportunity we can get? You might disagree, but I would say it does. I mean, we have Daryl Morey now, and the point of actually having a good GM is that you don't have to just accept that you're going to get housed in every deal you make just in order to get the thing you want. After 2 years of making all-in move after all-in move and not actually getting anywhere near all the way in, I'd like to see Daryl and the Sixers to actually commit to once again making trades that leave the other team grumbling a little bit. And that's the process that I was raised on. That's the process that we all fell in love with. And personally, just getting back to that means more to me than acquiring James Harden ever could.